Chapter: The Ballad of the Broken-Hearted. Uncle Vikram sang loudly as they walked, tapping his foot out of rhythm. He sang about traveling from the deep south to the high north, and walking from the brightest white into the darkest black. His off-key melody drifted down the bustling street of Shvetviagra city, catching the attention of passers-by, who cast curious glances at Aaryan and the older man, though no one lingered long enough to listen carefully. Not far behind them on the Grand Avenue, a group of 5 cultivators walked in a tight formation. 3 young women led the way, followed by 2 men who looked utterly dejected. One of the women turned back, urging her senior brothers to keep their pace and stop looking so miserable. One of the men sighed helplessly, quietly begging his junior sister to let them return to their quarters. Just then, Uncle Vikram's singing reached their ears. The other man groaned, complaining that the terrible singing was making their already foul mood even worse, and suggested they hurry back immediately. The lead woman, however, crossed her arms and refused. She declared that she wanted to see exactly who was ruining her mood, and the other 2 women quickly agreed. The trio marched angrily toward the source of the noise, leaving the 2 reluctant men with no choice but to trail behind them. Arriving in front of Uncle Vikram, the lead woman demanded to know how someone with such a terrible voice dared to perform in public. Uncle Vikram looked genuinely confused. He blinked and muttered that he thought he sounded perfectly fine. Aaryan quickly stepped forward to apologize, bowing his head and offering that perhaps their musical tastes simply differed. The woman scoffed, stating that they did not care about matters of taste. She threatened that if Aaryan and Uncle Vikram did not find a way to improve their sour moods, they would not be let off easily. Aaryan thought for a moment before offering a compromise. He proposed that he would sing them a few songs. If they liked even one, they would be allowed to leave peacefully, but if they hated them all, the cultivators could do with them as they wished. The 2 despondent men, eager for a distraction, readily agreed, and the women raised no objections. Aaryan turned to the 2 men and asked if they would prefer to hear a sad song. Though startled by the question, both men nodded slowly. Aaryan simply replied that he understood their pain. He ignored the preferences of the 3 women, choosing instead to perform for those who truly needed to listen. Uncle Vikram looked downcast after being so harshly criticized by the women. Aaryan patted his arm, consoling the older man by telling him that his voice was great. He just hadn't met an audience capable of appreciating it yet. Uncle Vikram's eyes lit up with hope as he asked if that was truly the case. Aaryan affirmed it with a straight face, assuring him that true art was rarely understood by the masses. Aaryan took his seat and positioned his polished sitar across his lap. He dedicated his first piece to the 2 heartbroken men, calling it the anthem of the most sorrowful souls in the world. One of the women immediately objected, taking offense at the title, but the 2 men were suddenly struck by a wave of emotion. Recalling their own recent heartbreaks, they felt the title described their inner turmoil perfectly. They both snapped at their junior sister to be quiet. Startled by her senior brother's sudden anger, the woman stamped her foot in frustration and backed away. The 2 men then offered Aaryan a respectful salute, urging him to begin. The sitar's strings hummed with a deep, resonant vibration. Aaryan's usually calm demeanor shifted, his face taking on a look of profound desolation, his steady eyes filling with an ancient sorrow. He sang of dreams where love was a paradise, of soaring recklessly through the heavens, and of believing that a lifetime of devotion would outlast the very earth and sky. His voice trembled as he sang about enduring 1,000 bitter hardships, only to receive a cold apology in return. His rich, melancholic voice, paired with his lonely expression, painted a picture of absolute heartbreak. Listening to the song, the 2 men unconsciously drifted into their own painful memories. The joy of their past vanished like smoke, leaving only the vivid, heart-piercing agony of their present. The anguish they had buried deep within could no longer be contained. One of the men broke down in tears, crying out to his junior brother that he had loved his maiden so deeply, only to be told they were no longer suitable. He wailed in anguish, asking the heavens why she had chosen an untrained fool over him, a man she had known for less than a month, and why she was even willing to share that fool with other women. Hearing his companion's tormented cries, Aaryan gently rested his hands on the sitar strings to stop the music. The other man fell to his knees, grabbing his brother's shoulder. He sobbed out his own story, asking why his childhood sweetheart had abandoned him for that very same useless nobody, and how she could stand by and watch as that man beat him to a pulp. He screamed into the bustling street, begging to know what he had done wrong to deserve such cruelty. Piecing together their tearful confessions, Aaryan deduced that these two men were simply the discarded lovers of women who had decided to attach themselves to a rising prodigy. Believing that a performer should always serve his audience, Aaryan decided to offer them some worldly advice. He asked the gentleman for permission to speak, and the two men hastily wiped their tears, tidied their robes, and urged him to continue. Aaryan told them that they should not feel sad, but rather relieved and happy. When the men looked at him in confusion, Aaryan asked if this rival of theirs was originally considered a useless fool who had suddenly experienced a miraculous rise in power. The men nodded vigorously. Aaryan then asked if this man constantly defeated opponents far above his own spiritual level, growing his prana at an unimaginable speed. The men agreed entirely, stating that Aaryan had described the situation perfectly. Aaryan nodded wisely. He explained that there was no mistake in his judgment, and that the women they loved were simply venomous lotuses. He described them as women who appeared innocent, delicate, and gentle on the outside, but were actually deeply calculating manipulators on the inside. The two men protested in unison, refusing to believe their former loves were so shallow. Aaryan remained patient. He asked them why these women had never shown interest in the rival back when he was weak and useless. He asked if the men had considered whether they themselves had lacked faithfulness or kindness. The men sighed, admitting that it was simply because the rival could now offer the women power and status that they could not provide. Seeing the two men sink into deep contemplation, Aaryan gently stoked the fire of their realization. He urged them to think carefully about the truth of his words. After a long moment of silence, the two men slapped their foreheads in sudden clarity. They realized how foolish they had been to desperately pursue women who only valued them for their utility. Aaryan smiled and pointed out that this was exactly why they should feel happy to be free of them. The men agreed wholeheartedly and invited Aaryan and Uncle Vikram to join them for a meal and a drink. Aaryan swiftly packed up his sitar, pulling Uncle Vikram along as he accepted the invitation. As they walked, Aaryan gestured toward the three women who had been following them. He complimented the women, noting that despite their abrasive words earlier, they had stayed by the men's sides through their lowest moments, proving their genuine loyalty. He hinted that the men should perhaps look closer at those who were exerting themselves on their behalf, rather than chasing phantoms. The two men paused, the realization washing over them. They offered Aaryan a deep, formal bow of gratitude for awakening them to the truth. Two of the women teared up, deeply moved that someone had finally recognized their silent devotion. A mushy scene of sibling affection unfolded, which Aaryan and Uncle Vikram watched with polite awkwardness. Only the youngest of the three women, a girl named Kavya, crossed her arms and shivered, declaring the entire display to be entirely too cheesy. Aaryan chuckled, telling her that she was still young and would understand when she grew up. Kavya pouted unhappily, glaring at Aaryan and demanding to know why he thought she was too young. Having no desire to critique a young woman's maturity, Aaryan simply asked her to rank the importance of family, romance, and friendship. Kavya answered confidently that family ties came first, friendship second, and romance last. Aaryan smiled knowingly, telling her that when she truly experienced the weight of the world, she could come back and lecture him on what mattered most. Kavya scratched her head in confusion, but Aaryan simply offered a mysterious smile and kept walking. Chapter: A Meal and a Warning. Once the group finally calmed down, they made their way to a nearby tavern. Along the way, Kavya clung to Aaryan's side, peppering him with relentless questions. She had quickly transitioned from asking who he was to affectionately calling him Brother Aaryan. She eventually asked him what his greatest dream in life was. Before Aaryan could deflect the question, Uncle Vikram jumped in, laughing that Aaryan simply wanted to marry a nice wife and have a house full of children. Kavya was utterly disappointed, finding the dream entirely too mundane. Aaryan grew serious, explaining that such a life only looked simple to those who had never starved. He told her that he had nothing to his name, just a pathetic life spent trying to survive in a ruthless world. He spoke of the fear of offending the rich and powerful, of lowering his head to local thugs, and of navigating a world where cultivators saw ordinary mortals as nothing more than ants beneath their boots. He explained that just to fill his stomach, he had to swallow his pride and sing for strangers, asking her what room there was for grand dreams in a life like that. Kavya immediately apologized, her lively demeanor subdued. Aaryan waved it off casually, stating that it was simply his fate, and that living peacefully for a few decades was enough for him. Kavya, ever curious, asked what he would do if he were ever granted the divine boon to cultivate his prana. Aaryan dismissed the thought, saying there were no such things as what-ifs, and that perhaps he would consider it when he was an old man and his mindset had changed. Kavya changed tactics, asking what kind of girl he wanted to marry. Aaryan replied that he only wanted someone of average looks with a kind personality. Kavya pointed proudly to herself, asking if someone like her would fit the description. Aaryan evaluated her objectively, noting her lively personality and slender frame, but quickly shook his head, saying he had never considered it. When Kavya pressed him for a reason, Aaryan replied deadpan that his mother had taught him that beautiful women brought nothing but trouble. The group groaned at the sheer audacity of the statement, but Kavya stubbornly insisted his mother must have been lying. Aaryan nodded in agreement, joking that his mother was indeed very beautiful, which only left the group speechless. Kavya continued to press him, asking for any other reason he wouldn't marry her. Aaryan bluntly stated that beautiful women attracted dangerous men, and he had no desire to end up like her senior brothers, beaten to a pulp or killed over a misunderstanding. The two senior brothers glared at him, effectively ending the conversation. They arrived at a fine tavern and secured a private room. The cultivators generously offered to pay for whatever Aaryan and Uncle Vikram desired. Neither man possessed the capacity for shame when it came to a free meal. Uncle Vikram, having sealed away his advanced spiritual aura to blend in as a mortal, was ravenously hungry. Aaryan ordered a feast of roast mutton, clay oven chicken, spicy river fish, flatbreads, roasted cashews, and a large jug of local palm wine. The food arrived quickly, and the cultivators watched in stunned silence as Aaryan and Uncle Vikram devoured the feast like starving wolves. Once the meal was nearly finished, the senior brother respectfully asked Aaryan to explain how the useless nobody who had stolen his love had become so powerful so quickly. Aaryan casually wiped his mouth and obliged. He explained that men like that were usually either the reincarnation of an ancient rishi who had usurped a corpse, or they possessed an ancient, unrivaled spiritual master bound to a physical object they carried. He detailed how these bound objects would silently drain the wearer's prana for years, hindering their cultivation and making them appear useless. Eventually, the dormant master would awaken, form a pact with the wearer, and use their ancient knowledge to force a miraculous leap in power. The cultivators listened in absolute awe. They pointed out that for someone who claimed to know nothing of cultivation, Aaryan understood the deepest secrets of the spiritual world. The senior brother nervously swallowed, asking how they could possibly defeat someone with that kind of backing. Aaryan rolled his eyes. He asked if they were tired of playing the role of disposable stepping stones, existing purely to be publicly humiliated so the chosen one could prove his worth. He explicitly warned them against seeking revenge, stating that these chosen ones were favored by the heavens, and that provoking them was akin to seeking death. He advised them to keep their distance, avoid giving the rival any excuse to start a fight, and simply live their own lives. By removing themselves from the narrative, the rival would have no one to show off against, and the venomous lotuses would eventually lose interest. The cultivators stood up and offered a deep, collective bow of gratitude, thanking Aaryan for his profound insights and offering their help should he ever need it. Aaryan and Uncle Vikram returned the gesture, wishing them well on their travels and stating they would be staying in Shvetviagra city for the time being. As they turned to leave, Kavya called out her name. Aaryan paused, letting the gentle evening breeze blow through his messy hair. With a melancholy look in his eyes, he murmured a poetic line about being a lone shadow on a cold river, asking why wanderers should bother remembering each other's names when their paths were destined to separate. He turned and walked away, secretly congratulating himself on delivering such a cool, dramatic exit line. Kavya watched him go, her eyes shining with admiration, vowing to memorize the line so she could use it to sound mysterious in the future. Chapter: An Illusion of Stardom. Night fell over Shvetviagra city. Aaryan and Uncle Vikram found themselves huddled under a damp stone bridge, resting on thin straw mats beneath worn, cotton-stuffed quilts. Aaryan tossed and turned, staring at the stone arch above them. He muttered that living like stray dogs was simply not going to work, and that he was desperately trying to formulate a better plan. Uncle Vikram suggested they take their musical act to the local tea houses or the grand courtesan pavilions, noting that patrons there were actively seeking entertainment and were more open to new experiences. Aaryan sighed heavily, agreeing that it was their best option, but lamented that their performance lacked visual flair. He mentioned offhandedly how wonderful it would be if they possessed a Maya stone, a rare spiritual crystal capable of projecting illusions. To Aaryan's absolute shock, Uncle Vikram sat up and calmly stated that he had one. Aaryan scrambled back, demanding to know if the older man was actually a cultivator. Uncle Vikram rolled his eyes, asking how Aaryan had failed to notice. Aaryan slapped his forehead, admitting he had simply assumed the man was a wandering eccentric. He respectfully asked what stage of cultivation Uncle Vikram had reached, and the older man proudly declared himself to be a master of the inner Lotus, a high prana stage that commanded immense respect. Aaryan immediately dropped to his knees to offer a formal bow of reverence, but Uncle Vikram waved him off, warning him not to get any grand ideas. He reiterated that he only wanted to live a quiet, ordinary life away from the bloodshed of the sections. Aaryan smiled slyly, climbing to his feet and patting the older man's shoulder. He asked if, since they were partners, they could perhaps make use of Uncle Vikram's storage ring and magical artifacts. Uncle Vikram reluctantly agreed. Aaryan quickly outlined a brilliant plan. He asked if the Maya stone could record the beautiful landscapes around the city and project them as a backdrop while they performed. When Uncle Vikram confirmed it could, Aaryan excitedly asked if they could mute the natural sounds of the recording and project-written lyrics onto the illusion itself. Uncle Vikram stated it was a simple matter of manipulating spiritual energy. Overjoyed, Aaryan lunged forward to kiss the older man on the cheek, sending a terrified Uncle Vikram scrambling backward into the dirt. The very next day, the two men left the city gates to capture the breathtaking scenery of the surrounding valleys. By the afternoon, they had recorded enough visual material and spent the rest of the day syncing their music and lyrics to the illusions. Aaryan selected 10 beautiful, melancholic ballads and prepared a few upbeat, rhythmic tavern songs specifically designed for the rowdier crowds. They tested the projection that night under the bridge, and the glowing, ethereal lyrics floating over scenic mountains looked perfectly magical. The following morning, they canvassed half the tea houses in the city before finally convincing a secluded, two-story establishment to let them perform, though Aaryan had to promise the greedy owner a full third of their earnings. After sharing a cheap bowl of noodles for lunch, Aaryan dragged a reluctant Uncle Vikram toward the city's pleasure district. They were unceremoniously kicked out of several high-end brothels due to their shabby clothing, but Aaryan remained unbothered, moving from door to door with unwavering persistence. Uncle Vikram followed behind with mixed feelings. He thought to himself that the young man's resilience made his own centuries of life feel inadequate. Aaryan never complained about the injustice of his fate, never resigned himself to despair, and never considered turning to crime. Uncle Vikram felt it was a tragic injustice that someone with such an indomitable mindset possessed no talent for cultivation. Aaryan soon stopped outside a quiet, elegant building named the Lotus Lodge. He asked Uncle Vikram to wait outside to avoid being thrown into the mud again, and confidently walked through the front doors. A young servant approached, politely asking if he sought wine or the company of the maidens. Aaryan apologized, stating he was a performer looking for work. The servant kindly told him to wait while he fetched the proprietress, Lady Padma. The Lotus Lodge was remarkably spacious, yet unusually quiet, with almost no patrons in sight. Soon, the servant returned alongside a voluptuous, stunningly beautiful woman. Aaryan hurried over, keeping his eyes respectfully lowered to the floor so as not to stare at her alluring figure. He asked if the lodge was in need of a singer. Lady Padma smiled faintly, taking a seat with a graceful elegance that made the young servant swallow hard. She stated that her need for a singer depended entirely on the quality of the song. Aaryan replied humbly that only she could be the judge of his talent. Amused by his polite restraint, Lady Padma challenged him. She told him a story of a man who had once promised to stay with her for a lifetime, only to abandon her without a word. She challenged Aaryan to sing a song that captured the exact emotion of that betrayal. Aaryan knew he had the perfect ballad prepared. He asked her to wait a moment and ran to the entrance, wildly waving for Uncle Vikram to bring the equipment inside. They quickly set up the Maya stone in the center of the quiet hall. Lady Padma watched in confusion, but Aaryan simply promised she would understand in a moment. Aaryan tested his wooden acoustic amplifier, nodding to Uncle Vikram to activate the crystal. The air in the hall shimmered, and a projection of a gently falling snowstorm materialized in the center of the room, accompanied by a beautifully mournful melody. The few servants in the hall gasped in shock, marveling at how a rare spiritual artifact was being used for mere entertainment. Lady Padma leaned forward, her interest fully captured by the sheer audacity of the performance. As glowing words began to float through the projected snowstorm, Aaryan began to sing. His voice filled the quiet lodge, carrying lyrics about falling snowflakes, broken promises of growing old together, and the lingering phantom touch of a lover's hand in her hair. Because the lyrics were visible in the air, every word struck with perfect clarity. As Aaryan poured his soul into the performance, Lady Padma's expression cracked. The walls she had built around her heart crumbled, and tears began to stream down her flawless face. She closed her eyes, wondering how a stranger could sing lyrics that felt as if they had been ripped directly from her own tragic past. She let the music wash over her, allowing herself to weep openly for the first time in years. Aaryan remained completely focused on his singing, oblivious to the profound emotional impact he was having on the proprietress. Uncle Vikram watched the scene unfold from the shadows, smiling softly to himself. He realized that Aaryan had finally secured their livelihood, earning his success through sheer, unyielding effort.